Hi, and welcome to part one of my hopefully ongoing series of reading the first 10 pages of YA fantasy out loud in an attempt to persuade people not to buy back into the TERF propaganda that is the Harry Potter series. Whew, that was a mouthful. Let's get started. Boom! Wizard of Earthsea, Ursula K. Le Guin. We're going to read the first 10 pages of this. If you're hooked, you should totally read this to your kids because, woo! The amount of shit stolen from this series alone by J.K. Rowling is pretty fucking intense. Now, there's a difference between stealing, like, outright and it being a tribute. I don't see any tributes in J.K. Rowling's work. There is, I believe, a word tribute in, like, a single word, like a name, in the Discworld series, but I'm not sure. So I'm gonna have to look into it a little bit more. Without further ado, let us get started with A Wizard of Earthsea. This is the map of Earthsea. Now, whenever I open a book, and I don't care what book it is, like, even if it's, especially like Lord of the Rings or something, and I see a map, I'm immediately thinking, like, wow, this author has already engaged in a bunch of world building. Okay, let's get started. Warriors in the Mist. The island of Gaunt, a single mountain that lifts its peak a mile above the storm-racked northeast sea, is a land famous for wizards. From the towns in its high valleys to the ports in its dark, narrow bays, many a Gauntsman has gone forth to serve the lords of the archipelago in their cities as wizard or mage, or, looking for adventure, to wander, working magic from isle to isle of all of Earthsea. Of these, some say the greatest, and surely the greatest voyager, was a man called Sparrowhawk, who in his day became both Dragonlord and Archmage. His life is told of in the Deed of Ged, and many in songs. But this is the tale of the time before his fame, before the songs were made. He was born in a lonely village called 10 Alders, high on the mountain at the head of the northward vale. Below the village, the pastures and the plowlands of the vale slope downward, level below level, towards the sea. The other towns lie on the bends of the river Ar. Above the village, only forest rises. Ridge behind ridge to the stone and snow of the heights. The name he bore as a child, Dunny, was given him by his mother, and that and his life were all she could give him, for she died before he was a year old. His father, the bronze smith of the village, was a grim, unspeaking man, and since Dunny's 6 brothers were older than he by many years, and went one by one from the home to farm the land or sail the sea or work as a smith in other towns of the northward vale, there was no one to bring the child up in tenderness. He grew wild, a thriving weed, a tall, quick boy, loud and proud and full of temper. With the few other children in the village, he herded goats on the steep meadows above the river springs, and when he was strong enough to push and pull the long bellows sleeves, his father made him work as a smith's boy, at high cost in blows and whippings. There was not much work to be got out of Dunny. He was always off and away, roaming deep in the forest, swimming in the pools of the river Ar, that, like all Gauntish rivers, runs deep, quick, and cold, or climbing cliff and scarp to the heights of the forest, from which he could see the sea, the broad northern ocean, where past the Perigal no islands are. The sister of his dead mother lived in the village. She had done what was needful for him as a baby, but she had business of her own, and once he could look after himself at all, paid no heed to him. But one day, when the boy was 7 years old, untaught, and knowing nothing of the arts and powers that are in the world, he heard his aunt crying out words to a goat, which had jumped up onto the thatch of a hut, and would not come down. but it came jumping when she cried a certain rhyme to it. Next day, herding the long-haired goats on the meadows of Highfall, Dunny shouted to them the words he had heard, and not knowing their use or meaning, or what kind of words they were, Nath hireth machman, hirak ban nath han. He yelled the rhyme aloud, and the goats came to him. They came very quickly, all of them together, not making a sound. They looked at him out of their dark yellow slot in their yellow eyes. Dunny laughed and shouted out again the rhyme that gave him power over the goats. They came closer, crowding and pushing around him. All at once he felt afraid of their thick, rigid horns and their strange eyes and their strange silence. He tried to get free of them and run away. The goats ran with him, keeping in a knot around him, so that they came charging down to the village at last. All the goats going huddled together, as if a rope were pulled tight around them, and the boy in the midst of them, weeping and bellowing. Villagers ran from houses to swear at the goats and laugh at the boy. Among them came the boy's aunt, who did not laugh. She said a word to the goats, and the beasts began to bleat and browse and wander, and freed from the spell. "Come with me," she said to Dunny. She took him into her hut, where she lived alone. She let no child enter there, usually, and children feared the place. It was low and dusky, windowless, fragrant with herbs that hung drying from the cross-pole in the roof. Mint and moly and thyme, yarrow, rushwash and paramol, kingsfoil, clovenfoot, tansy, and bay. There his aunt sat cross-legged by the fire pit, looking sidelong at the boy through tangles of black hair. She asked him what he had said to the goats, and if he knew what the rhyme was. When she found out he knew nothing, and yet had spellbound the goats to come to him and follow him, then she saw he must have in him the makings of power. As her sister's son, he had been nothing to her, but now she looked at him with a new eye. She praised him and told him she might teach him rhymes he would like better, such as the word that makes a snail look out of its shell, or the name that calls a falcon down from the sky. "Aye, teach me the name," he said, being clear over the fright of the goats, and puffed up with praise and cleverness. They do not want to see your bunghole on TV. No. Hi, thank you. The witch said to him, "You will not ever tell that word to the other children if I teach it to you." "I promise." She smiled at his ready ignorance. "Well and good, but I will bind your promise. Your tongue will be stilled until I choose to unbind it." Jasper, you are the best cat in the universe. You know that? "We must keep the secrets of our craft." "Good," said the boy, for he had no wish to tell the secret to his playmates, liking to know and do what they knew not and could not. He sat still while his aunt bound back her uncombed hair and knotted the belt of her dress, and sat again, cross-legged, throwing handfuls of leaves into the fire pit so that the smoke spread and filled the darkness of the hut. She began to sing. Her voice changed sometimes to low or high, as if the other voice sang through her. And the singing went on until the boy did not know if he waked or slept. And all the while, the witch's old black dog that never barked sat by him with eyes red from the smoke. Then the witch spoke to Dunny in a tongue he did not understand, and made him say with her certain rhymes and words until the enchantment on him and held him still. Until the enchantment came on him and held him still. "Speak," she said, to test the spell. The boy could not speak, but he laughed. This, his aunt was a little afraid of his strength, for this was a strong spell, as strong a spell as she knew how to weave. She had tried not only to gain control of his speech and silence, but to bind him at the same time to her service in the craft of sorcery. Yet even as the spell bound him, he had laughed. She said nothing. She threw clear water on the fire till the smoke cleared away, and gave the boy water to drink. And when the air was clear and he could speak again, she taught him the true name of the falcon, to which the falcon must come. This was Dunny's first step on the way to follow all his life, or the way he was to follow all his life. Life! Ah! The way of Majory, the way that led him at last to hunt a shadow over land and sea, to lightless coasts of Death's kingdom. But in those first steps along the way, it seemed a broad, bright road, where he found the wild falcons stooped down to him from the wind where he summoned them by name, lighting with a thunder of wings on his wrist, like the hunting birds of a prince. Then he hungered to know more such names, and came to his aunt begging to learn the name of the sparrowhawk, and the osprey, and the eagle. To earn the words of power, he did all that the witch asked of him, and learned all that she taught, though not all of it was pleasant to do or know. There is a saying on Gaunt, weak as a woman's magic, and there is another saying, wicked as a woman's magic. Now, the Witch of 10 Alders was no black sorceress, nor did she ever meddle with the high arts or traffic with old powers, but being an ignorant woman among ignorant folk, she often used her crafts to foolish and dubious ends. She knew nothing of the balance and the pattern which the true wizard knows and serves, and which keep him from using his spells unless real need demands. She had a spell for every circumstance, and was forever weaving charms. Much of her lore was mere rubbish and humbug, nor did she know the true spells from the false. She knew many curses, and was better at causing sickness, perhaps, than curing it. Like any village witch, she could brew up a love potion, but there were other, uglier brews she made to serve man's jealousy and hate. Such practices, however, she kept from her young prentice, and, as far as she was able, she taught him honest craft. At first, all his pleasure in the magic art was childlike, the power it gave him over bird, beast, and the knowledge of these. And indeed, the pleasure stayed with him all his life, seeing him in the high pastures, often with a bird of prey about him. The other children called him Sparrowhawk, and so became the name that he kept in later life as his username, when his true name was not known. As the witch kept talking of the glory and the riches and the great power over men that a sorcerer could gain, he set himself to learn more useful lore. He was very quick at it. The witch praised him, and the children of the village began to fear him, and he himself was sure that very soon he would become great among men. So he went on from word to word and from spell to spell with the witch until he was 12 years old, and had learned from her a great part of what she knew. Not much, but enough for the witch wife of a small village, and more than enough for a boy of 12. She had taught him all her lore in herbals and healing, and all she knew of the crafts of finding, binding, mending, unsealing, and revealing. What she knew of chanters' tales and great deeds she had sung to him, and all the words of true speech that she had learned from the sorcerer that taught her, she taught again to Dunny. And from weatherworks and wandering jugglers, who went from town to town of the northward vale and the east forest, he had learned various tricks and pleasantries, spells of illusion. It was with one of these light spells that he first proved the great power that was in him. In those days, the Kargad Empire was strong. These 4 great lands lie between the northern and eastern reaches: Karago-At, Atuan, Hurat-Hur, and Atnini. The tongue they speak are not like any spoken in the archipelago or other reaches. They are a savage people, white-skinned, yellow-haired, and fierce, liking the skin of blood and the smell of burning towns. Last year they had attacked the Torquils and the strong island of Torhaven, riding in great force in fleets from red-sailed ships. News of this crime came to the north of Gaunt, but the lords of Gaunt were busy with their piracy and paid small heed to the woes of other lands. Then Spebby fell to the Cargs and was looted and laid waste, its people taken as slaves, so that even now it is an isle of ruins. The lust of conquest and the Cargs sailed next to Gaunt, coming in a host, 30 great longships to Eastport. They fought through the town, took it, burned it, leaving their ships under guard at the mouth of the River Ar, where they went up the vale, wrecking and looting, slaughtering cattle and men. As they went, they split into bands, and each of these bands plundered where it chose. Fugitives brought warning to their village of the heights. Soon, the people of 10 Alders saw smoke darken the eastern sky. And that night, those who climbed the high fall looked down to the vale all hazed and red-streaked, and with fires where fields ready for harvest had set ablaze, and orchards burned, the fruit roasting on the blazing boughs, and barns and farmhouses smoldered in ruin. Some of the villagers fled up the ravines and hid in the forest. Some made ready to fight for their lives, and some did neither, but stood about lamenting. The witch was one who fled, hiding alone in a cave up on the Caperling Scarp, and sealing the cave mouth with spells. Dunny's father, the bronze smith, who was one who stayed, for he would not leave his smelting pit and forge where he had worked for 50 years. All that night he labored, beating up what ready metal he had there into spear points, and others worked with him, binding these to the handles of hoes and rakes, there being no time to make sockets to shaft them properly. There had been no weapons in the village but hunting bows and short knives, for the mountain folk of Gaunt are not warlike. It is not warriors they are famous for, but goat thieves, sea pirates, and wizards. And that is the penultimate paragraph of page 10. So I'm going to leave it there, and I encourage you to pick up whatever edition of A Wizard of Earthsea you can. And, there are about 5 more books, so you're not going to be out of options. That's a good one. I'll be reading Wizard's Hall by Jane Yolen next week.